I am Jeff Ado. This is Lunacy, where we discern the sacred from the insane and admit that whether we like it or not, we are all profoundly affected by the cycles of the moon. How? You're not gonna howl?
Got a good howl. I didn't know how it was going to go. I think you did great, though.
Do you want a second opportunity? Because I'll give you another opportunity.
I'm good on the howl.
All right, look. My guest today is Sterling the Hawk Hawkins. He is a public speaker, motivational man. He is also an author, a really great author. He wrote a book called Hunting Discomfort, and he's working on a bunch of new stuff right now, which I'm sure he'll share with us on the podcast. He's a very good friend of mine, a partner in transformation and love. And this is his third appearance on Lunacy, ladies and gentlemen, the first triple guest. Okay. So welcome to the program, Sterling Hawk Hawkins.
I'm honored to be here. Thanks for having me on. It's always so great catching up with you. I feel like we have the most opportunity to catch up on these podcasts, and I really kind of honor the experience with you. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I you're a brother of mine, and I mean that very literally. I really feel that way. And Brotherhood, I think, is such a great medicine in general. And
Yeah.
One thing I found about doing this podcast is, man, it's a really great way to get deeper into relationship with people and really get to know people that I don't know. You're somebody I know, but it's still like there's endless layers. So I agree. I honor your honoring of my honoring with the honoring.
all sorts of honor before we dive in.
Just honor. It's all over the place.
We've been through a lot together. So,
That's
and
true.
I think it's these conversations that you get to dig a little bit deeper into things that maybe you wouldn't chat about over drinks or a coffee or just a normal catch up. So I really do love this time.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. I agree. I think I was reflecting earlier. The first podcast that we did actually was when I was in Denver and my dad was in the hospital.
That's right.
And I was very afraid that he was going to pass then, and he made a miraculous recovery. And then the second podcast that I think we did, he was doing okay. I think I can't remember if that was after we got married or not, but and then he passed in March. So
Yeah.
and we've talked obviously since then, you and I. But I just want to also honor my father.
Yeah.
I'm already crying. God, that didn't take long. But I love you, Papa. We miss you so much. Yeah. So anyway, and the reason that I had you on them having you on the program today is, we've really revamped the Lunacy podcast, how it's going, and we've started Lunacy Community, which, by the way, if you're interested, please go to lunacycommunity.com out there, check it out, sign up, create a profile. There's no, you don't have to pay anything. It's free. And that's a place where we'll be able to kind of gather and create sort of transformation and post on things. And there'll be special offerings, et cetera, which you and I are going to work out something where also you're able to communicate with guests directly through that network. And also we have themes. So the month for January is reinvention. And when I was thinking about guests that could come on the show and really powerfully speak about what it means to reinvent yourself, your name popped in my head, Sterling, big time. I was like, fucking Sterling Reinvention Hawkins needs to come on the program. All right. For sure. We got to suss this out for people and ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's an important topic. Like how do you change? We live in a world that's changing faster than ever. Global instability, economic uncertainty, political uncertainty, especially coming into an election year. I mean, it's just wild out there. And I think the capacity as human beings to be able to grow and change and reinvent is the most critical thing to not just experience success in the tangible world, but to really find fulfillment within ourselves.
Yeah, beautifully said. That's right. I totally agree. And I also think, coming to the election year and with everything that's going on that you mentioned, it seems like kind of the world is falling apart, which I know people have been saying for generations, but it's a little more obvious these days.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's getting a little closer. Okay. Look around the world. It's getting crazy. And so, for me, so much of that is like, well, what are the things that are problematic for the planet that are ways of behavior that we as individuals have, like, greed, thinking we always have to have more and being in a mindset of scarcity, which like all of that comes out of fear. So, how do
Yeah.
we transform ourselves and really start coming from love more and really having more of a love operating system, which requires reinvention, really requires changing our state and looking at how we've been in the past and dreaming of who we want to be in the future, and then really like taking the actions we need to take to create ourselves in
Mhm.
the fashion that we want to be.
Totally. Yeah. I think it's opening up your mind to new perspectives and softening your heart to some of the uncomfortable things that have been holding you back, that it frees you from those things and lets you achieve a greater potential to be more in alignment with who you really are, where you really want to go. Um, Not just in business, like I work with a lot of business leaders, but in life, I don't think this is like a professional capacity or just a personal capacity. I think this is just like a human capacity that we use anywhere and everywhere we show up.
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely right. And I think it's really necessary. Like
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, if we're gonna pull this mother out, we really need a massive transformation, I think, on a global level. And
Hmm.
for better or worse, this is just the way that it is. The only way that that can happen is on a personal level. It can only
Yeah.
the transformation that needs to happen around the world has to happen individually within each person's heart because they really see the value of coming from love, of really embracing, living a life of honor, living with right action, right? However you want to phrase it, like uh, really making amends and having courage, that's the only way. Otherwise we'll just continue down the same, rabbit hole that's leading us to environmental devastation and economic collapse. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. No, no big deal.
no big deal. So good. Well, I'm
Yeah.
excited that you and I are going to solve the world's problems on this podcast today.
Well, maybe a couple of good ideas for sure. For
No,
sure.
man, it's up to us. All right. If we don't fix it right now, uh,
Yeah.
the world's going to explode in
Yeah.
giant, like the Death Stars right now out there right now. They're just going to shoot us down.
It feels like it might with Russia these days, but
Yeah.
But I think there's something to that though. He's taking on personal accountability and responsibility for what's going on. Like it's easy
Hmm.
to sit and watch the news and yell at the TV and criticize the other point of view, the other political party. But like, what are you actually going to do? To your point, like, how are you going to shift and change and adjust and reinvent to be able to go forward? What
Yeah.
worries me is not just all the uncertainty and all the scary things that are happening out there, but
Hmm.
it feels like there's an increasing unwillingness to see another's point of view.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's just like I'm right and you're wrong, and here's all the data to back it up, and the other person has all the conflicting data somehow, and nobody wants to discover the greater truth. And it's like, okay, well, both of you might be right in different ways, but how do we come together and maybe have some tough conversations to see what the greater truth is? Like, there's something beyond us that we're not seeing that we've got to really be able to open ourselves up to be able to discover. So,
Yeah. Beautifully said. Yeah, we're just becoming more and more polarized, and you see that
yeah,
everywhere politically. I mean, honestly, I'm very nervous about this year with the election and everything because it's so right and left. It's gotten so blue and red, and it's just,
yeah.
what the whole system, if you ask me, is totally corrupt, and there's evidence of that everywhere. And so it's just one party, pointing the finger at the other party when really lobbyists and the corporations are paying everybody to do what they're doing. It's just you don't have to. I'm not being a conspiracy theorist. Just look at the facts. It's
Yeah.
it's startling. We don't live in a. Unfortunately, we don't live in a true democracy anymore. We live in an oligarchy, and the antitrust laws that we put forward, to make sure that corporations didn't get too big and didn't start lobbying people to pay, so that we just ignore public health and make profit. Those somehow they managed to pay everybody off so that that's not an issue. And now we live in the world that we live in, and we're just maybe starting to realize the dangers of that, and the problems along with that. And so, because of that, it's critically important that we as individuals rise up, speak up, stand up, and actually do something about being in charge of our own destiny,
Yeah.
individually, societally, and as a species.
Yeah, and do the real work of letting go of limiting beliefs we might have about ourselves, each other, the world, what's possible, what's not possible, letting go of self-doubt, like really doing the hard work, the internal work that makes all the difference for us individually and all for the people around us.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's interesting. I was Martin Luther King Day, I watched a couple of movies. I watched Ruskin, which I don't know if you've seen that film, but it's
Have not.
absolutely can't highly more recommend a movie. Really, it's brilliant. Ruskin, he's the guy that he put together the March on Washington, where Martin Luther King gave the "I Have a Dream" speech,
Wow.
and he was gay also. And
Yeah.
so it gets into all of he had so many obstacles in putting that thing together, and people tried to shoot him down left and right. And he put it up and put it together and made it happen, because he felt that the civil rights movement needed a unifying voice, and they needed a visceral example of what it means having people come together. And he was very adamant about that. And I think that's absolutely something that we need. That you don't see that. You saw the Black Lives Matter movement, and that was really great, but it was a little different than a full on peace march. And I don't know. I'm not saying it didn't make a difference. It definitely made a difference. I'm sure that it made a difference. I have no doubt, but it's different than kind of, I think, what we need now. That and Harriet, which is another great movie about Harriet Tubman,
Mm.
which I highly recommend. And what she did, she took obviously very real action and put herself in danger time and time again. And what's beautiful about that film is she also, like, she gets messages from God.
Wow.
Yeah, there are like a lot of moments where she just like stops and gets to her knees and like sees the future, and she's like, "Okay, we can't go this way. We have to go a different way." And then she goes a different way, which I I don't know, man. Maybe that's not historically accurate, but it must be. Otherwise, why would they put it in there? Also, considering how many times she put herself in harm's way, how many times she went down into the southern territories to get people to free them, there must have been something where she was listening to her guides and seeing some kind of like, okay, we can't go this direction. She was really listening to her heart and her spirit, and that enabled
Mm.
her to see, to have an intuition about where she was going and what was going to be safe and not safe in a very literal way.
Gosh, that gives me goosebumps. And do you know the story of Martin Luther King actually wasn't going to give the dream speech on Lincoln Memorial that day?
Yeah, go on though.
Yeah. Well, the authorities approached him the night before and told him not to talk about his dream because it would incite riots. And he actually agreed. So he's up there on that famous day giving a different talk than the one that we all know. But what's really powerful for me is that he had somebody that stood for his dream. Her name was Mahalia Jackson, famous gospel singer, sitting behind him on that stage. And while he's giving the talk, she says, "Martin, tell them about your dream." And he ignores her because, when we're in the middle of something, how easy is it to ignore somebody that's really standing for your potential, for that dream that you have? And so she says it again, and he ignores her again. And then I think, like, what is it like to be in her shoes, sitting on the stage? Somebody's giving a talk. There's thousands of people on the National Mall.
200,000
Like,
people.
what did it take for her to keep speaking up?
Mm-hmm.
And she said it a third time, and it's wild. I've listened to the recording. You can hear her in it. She says, "Martin, tell them about your dream."
Hmm.
And the next words out of his mouth, we all know because we live inside of not just that dream, but that dream held accountable to this day. He obviously said, I have a dream. And I think it's so important for us to not just share our dreams, but to find people that we can surround ourselves with that can support that dream, can hold us accountable to it in those moments where we start to compromise and let go of that dream. I think that's one of my favorite stories, period, about that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. You got tears in my eyes, kid. Good job. Way to go. Not that it's hard, but you did it. You
Yeah.
did it again, Sterling.
Yeah, well, I mean, I tear up when I share it sometimes and think
Yeah.
about it, and I go back and I listen to the recording sometimes. I'm like, that's what it takes.
Hmm.
Like, it takes an amount of courage to not just do the sharing, but to hold people accountable when it doesn't feel good,
Yeah.
when it doesn't look good, when it's not the opportune time. Like, it really takes something to create that kind of shift. And I've
Hmm.
got all the respect and honor and admiration in the world for the people that do it.
Yeah. Well, and I would say that you've done it without question. I think both you and I have done it at least to a certain extent. For sure, I'm a
Yeah,
very different man now than when we first met, and you're
you
a
really
very
are.
different man than
Yeah,
you were when we first met. Uh, so, I mean, I'm not like trying to brag or anything. It's not like that. I'm really just being straight about it.
yeah,
You've spoken in front of tens of thousands of people, probably hundreds of thousands of people if you counted all of them up. I
yeah,
started a podcast. I'm pursuing music. We're very different people than we were before. Um, you know, uh, I'm not wandering around as like a failed actor, wallowing in my own tears. Being a victim about it. That's not who I am anymore. Now I'm
yeah,
strong in who I am. I am convicted about what I'm doing. I get my why. To bring harmony with myself and other people on the planet. I get it. It's there for me.
yeah.
Um, so
And that's visible, by the way. I feel like what you look like has physically changed. Like, you look different than you did when we first met. And obviously it's years later, but in some ways it's almost like you look younger, more vibrant, or like there's something about you that's lighter, um, which is really cool to see.
that's awesome. Thank you so much for saying that. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'm glad I recorded it too, so I can go back and listen to it later. He said you look younger, Jeff. Remember that part where he said you look fucking younger? You look
Even
fucking
with the
younger.
gray
Way
beard.
younger. All right, with the gray beard.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, by the way,
Yeah.
folks at home, there is going to be a physical transformation on this podcast. You will see me change physically on this podcast, but I'm not gonna tell you what's happening yet. If normally I don't encourage people to watch the YouTube version of this, but if you want to see that, I'll let you know when it's going to happen. You could even switch at that point to the YouTube and watch to see your friend Jeff Ado totally transform his entire face. All right, it's happening.
I'm ready.
Yeah. Great. Well, so let's get into it. Today I really want to get into the 7 steps to reinventing oneself as I see them. And also, I want to give us a definition of reinvention that I invented. Okay. All right. Inventing reinvention. So I define reinvention as releasing habits, stories, traumas, and damaging ways of being so that you can live life to the fullest and be the you've always dreamed of being. To me, that's like full reinvention. That's like a full reset. That's me saying, I see this is who I've been before, and I see all these habits and all these ways of being that I've been and how I've been a victim, etc. I see all that stuff, and this is who I dream of being. I really want to be a guy that people can totally count on. I want to be somebody who stands for humanity. I want to be somebody who is investigating wisdom and like trying to be a more better version of myself and being humble and coming from love. That's who I want to be.
Hmm.
So to me, that definition fits with the idea of reinvention.
Sure. I mean, what's interesting to me about reinvention is if you look at the etymology, Re is from the Latin. It's something like in comparison to or in reference to. And that's interesting to think about because when we think about reinvention or even invention, it doesn't necessarily have to be in reference to who you've already been, right? Oftentimes that can get caught up in circumstances like because these things happen to me, because I feel like my personality is this way, I can't be something in the future. And
Hmm.
that's not true at all. However you
No.
wound up is just however you've wound up. And I think reinventing a contrast to what you had been is important to look at from a comparison standpoint, but from a creation standpoint or a being standpoint, it doesn't have to be built on anything rational necessarily. It doesn't have to be built on having the perfect resume or having the perfect relationships or the perfect jobs or anything else. Like when we think about creating something newly, becoming your potential, it can be purely that standing on the abyss of the unknown and creating newly from there.
That's beautiful. Really beautifully said. And that's right. I mean, that's right. We have to have the courage to just like empty ourselves of everything that we've known and like look and see, God, who do I really want to be? What would make a real difference in who I was being and how do I be that person? Regardless of the past and everything everybody else has told us and all the stories that we have that we've created and all of the trauma that we've endured and et cetera, all the things that tell us we can't do it.
Yeah.
Who do I want to be in the face of all of that?
Yeah. And I work with a lot of business leaders, a lot of early stage company people. And there's this sentiment that's pretty pervasive of people feeling like they're the phoenix rising from the ashes, right? Like
Mhm.
they've been through hardships, they've been through difficult things personally, professionally, and now they're ready to rise and move forward. And I'm all about that, by the way.
Yeah.
But I think just purely looking at that misses the most important part, which is the ashes.
Mhm.
Something is burning in order to rise. And I
Yeah.
think you've got to burn who you've been, your values, your perspectives, your beliefs that have maybe served you to get to this point, but are no longer serving you to reach that next level. And that is the
Mhm.
hardest part about rising. It's the hardest part about invention, reinvention. It's the hardest part about creating anything new is giving up what you've already been.
Yeah. Perfect. That's perfect. So that's a beautiful segue into step number 1 as I see it in the process of reinvention,
Let's
which
go.
is forgiveness. Not just forgiveness, but also releasing attachment to the way that I've been.
Yeah.
When I look harshly at who I've been in the past, or not harshly, but rather like starkly, right? When I really like take the blinders off and look at, okay, wow, man, I've been, oh boy, I see where I really, did these things and was lazy and didn't take these chances and was like triggered and being a jerk to these people, etc. Like when I really look at who I have been in the past,
Mm,
I got to forgive myself and I have to be willing to forgive myself. And so that for me is step number 1. And, I just kind of go back to like
mm.
Viktor Frankl. I believe Viktor Frankl said this, at least he made this point, which is like
Yeah.
forgiveness is a gift that you give yourself. Um, you know, and that's true. If I look at, okay, I'm going to look starkly at who I have been being, the damaging ways of being that I have had, the habits that I've had, the addictions that I've had,
Yeah.
all of that. And I'm going to look at it and I'm going to forgive myself. I'm going to say, okay, it's okay that I have been that way. And I accept myself as I am. And I'm choosing to love myself despite all of these judgments that I've had. And I'm willing to release my attachment to all those judgments that I've had and to all of the stories that I've had about myself that I can't do it or that
Yeah.
there's something wrong with me, etc. I'm willing to release that and just step into a zone of forgiveness, like of just really just being like, okay, I see that and I forgive myself and I forgive myself and I forgive myself. And, for a lot of us, I know for me, it's like, I really got to sit into it. I really got to meditate into it. I really actually have to say, I forgive myself over and over again until it becomes real, because
Yeah.
for whatever reason, it's very challenging for us to do that. And I don't know why. Maybe it's the inertia of the way that we've been being. Maybe it's that our ego has formed in this way and we've survived this way, so we think we have to hold on to these attachments and these old ways of being. I'm sure that's partially it. But it's for whatever reason there is a giant hill to reaching forgiveness, and we have to just keep on coming from love and keep on reminding ourselves that it's okay. It's
Yeah.
okay to be the man that I am, to be the woman that you are, to be the man that you are.
Yeah. Carl Jung, arguably the father of modern psychology, said we cannot change anything until we accept it. That's that forgiveness piece.
Hmm.
Condemnation about who we've been or what we've done or how we've treated people or the mistakes we've made does not liberate. It condemns. And I think it makes it very hard, maybe even impossible, to do much else. To add a little personal narrative, I know we've talked about this in prior podcasts, so I won't go into too
Yeah.
much detail, but I got fairly lucky with the first company that I started and became part of this like Apple Pay before Apple Pay.
Hmm.
And we raised hundreds of millions of dollars, multi-billion dollar valuation, living a scene on a Wolf of Wall Street. And I think like, oh, I've got this thing made. And when the housing market collapsed and the entire thing ended up going
Wait.
bankrupt.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. But were you, when you say Wolf of Wall Street, were you throwing midgets at a dartboard?
No, but they
Okay, good.
were at parties on occasion.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Sorry, little people. Little people.
That's right.
Uh,
That's right. You
okay.
gotta be PC with it.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, it was all the things. It was models in the office, parties at the Four Seasons. The rest I'll leave to everybody's imagination here. Like if you can imagine it, it was probably happening there.
Hmm.
And when the whole thing fell apart, it was really hard to forgive myself because I'm thinking we've got all the money in the world. We've got the patents. We've got the smartest people I've ever worked with. I and many were working like 18-hour days, like putting everything we had into this company. And for a long time, it was easier for me to point the finger, to be like, oh, well, this person messed up and it was their problem. And this is why they made the mistake. And I actually had to let go of some of those reasons and circumstances and excuses and the blame that I had put on other people in order to be able to forgive myself. And it actually was a process that took years to be
Hmm.
able to let go of those things and let some of those painful feelings in, to be able to accept them, reconcile them, and then to be able to grow from them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I actually remember when we first met, you were going through a lot of that, and we
Yeah,
talked about it considerably, and that was part of your whole process was like really like forgiving yourself and like you know I have to say like one of the most beautiful things about your transformation is just witnessing the humility that came, like especially from being that guy who's like making all that money, nobody
top of the
questions, you
world.
can't touch me, man, check out my car, etc.
Yeah,
um to then not having any of that and then really like accepting yourself and recreating yourself as somebody who is a contribution. That's what you do for a living, right? You live in service to others, right?
totally.
uh as an author and as a speaker. So
Yeah, that humility component is huge. I think there's so much power in humility.
mhm.
If we can speak like we know what we're talking about, if we're grounded in research or best practices or whatever it is, but then listen from a standpoint of I know nothing. What does this
Yeah,
other person know that I don't? And how
right.
can I add or adjust some of the things that I think are right based on this conversation? I think it's like the biggest superpower of humanity, to be able to listen with humility. Is It's almost like humility is the space that we're able to grow into, and if we don't have it, we can't grow.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, being vulnerable, being humble, realizing that I don't have it all figured out,
Yeah,
accepting that I don't have it all figured out, even accepting that the other person doesn't have it all figured out, but there's
right.
something to discover, uh, like you said, um, and it's liberating too. Humility is also the antidote to pride, which is such a huge fat trap for all of
Yeah,
us.
yeah,
We want to be prideful. And let's be clear, right? There's a distinction with pride. I can be proud of you, my friend, for being a good speaker. I can be proud
Yep.
of my wife for being an incredible coach and an incredible human, right? I can be proud of my friends, right, for what they're doing. I can be proud of, like, when I'm on stage, my fellow actors, my fellow musicians. I can be proud. I can have pride where I'm like, oh, I'm so proud of them. Like, I really, it's like a mudita, which is sympathetic
Yeah.
joy, right? In Buddhism, right? I can have that sort of pride.
Yep.
But then pride where I feel like I'm better than you, that's such a fat trap, and we fall into it all the time.
Yeah.
And it comes from an idea, a notion of scarcity, a notion that there's something wrong with me, a notion that I'm not enough, and so therefore I'm going to put on this front where I am better than you, and I know that I'm better than you because I'm white,
Yeah.
or I'm rich, or I'm whatever kind of fucking bullshit.
Yeah.
Whatever bullshit reason that you want to put in the way of, wait a minute, no, we're all human beings on this planet just trying to figure it out together. None of us really knows what's happening. Humility is really an antidote to that, and a constant reminder that it's okay to forgive myself for who I've been.
Yeah.
It's a huge red flag, and I noticed that within myself, because I still have that tendency. I am a human being. I am a man. I
Hmm.
noticed that tendency where I'm like, oh, oh, oh. I'm being prideful again. I think I'm better than them, and I see it, and I'm not. How do I, like, make amends for that?
Yeah.
Sometimes I catch it before I make mistakes. Other times I need to apologize, come
Totally.
clean about it.
Yeah, I'll notice that sometimes when I'm speaking, I'm on a lot of stages every year, and sometimes leading up to it, I can get into this perspective of I need to present something, like I have to teach these people something,
Hmm.
and I've got a process in place now. I've got a process for just about everything, but one that's especially important to me is what I'm doing the hours before I'm on the stage, because I have to shift that perspective, and not just mentally shift, but really inside of my heart shift. Oh, I'm not here to teach something. I'm not better than anybody. Just because I'm on the stage means nothing. I'm here
Hmm.
to share something that's touched my heart that I think is important, and to have a conversation with these folks and frankly learn from them and get some feedback and interact with them in ways that not just makes a difference for them, but makes a difference for me. And I think that's the thing to keep me going. If it was just standing on stages and presenting the same thing over and over again, I don't think I could do it. But it's the human connection of what we both get out of an interaction that gives me the resilience, the power to keep it rolling.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. It's really beautiful. I actually, it's funny you mentioned that, because I noticed that also in this podcast.
Mm,
I mean,
yeah,
who the fuck am I to
yeah,
talk about transformation and, like, having a greater degree of consciousness? It's like automatically I'm putting myself in a position where I'm like, well, I can tell you about what it means to live from a conscious perspective and really care about the earth. I don't know what you're doing,
yeah,
you know?
yeah,
Uh, so there is also for me kind of a constant checking myself process. And I have, like, a couple of notes on my light. And one of them is come from humility.
yeah,
Just keep, like, it's a reminder, just like, wait, okay. And then truly listen, you know? So that's great. So I think that's great. So along with forgiveness is humility. So that's step number one. We'll say forgiveness and humility. Step number two is grieving in the path to reinvention. And I think this is a critically important step because, as I've talked about on this podcast with a bunch of different guests, including my last guest, Vela, there is a dearth of grieving in the world. Like, if there's one thing that we could really use more of, it's grieving, and really consciously grieving and accepting that that's a critically important part of being human. And it's,
yeah,
like, really the only way to, like, clear out the gunk of, who we've been. And if I don't grieve for it, then it's still there. It still has the mass in my emotional body that it had, and it will perpetuate because I haven't grieved it. And so there's a couple sides of that. And of course, I want you to reflect here as well.
Mm.
One is I have to grieve the fact that I've been that way and that's sad. So that kind of goes along with forgiveness. Like I'm grieving the
Yep.
fact that I've been that way and that's sad that I've been being that way. Like I have lost time as that person.
Yep.
And then this is the trickiest one part of it. I have to grieve the loss of being that way, like an old friend. Because
Yeah.
the reality, and that's kind of a mind fucker. It's paradoxical because I wouldn't think that I would need to grieve being a victim. I wouldn't think that I would need to grieve, being living in scarcity. But the reality is I have lived with that guy for so long who has
Mhm.
been that way, had these damaging ways of being, and that guy got me to here. Here I am because of that guy. And also, being that guy, I got all kinds of things out of that, right? The racket, right?
Yep.
Of being that way, right? I got to not be responsible. I got to point the finger at other people and blame other people. I got to cross my arms, turn around. I got to hide.
Yeah.
I got to be safe, right? Whatever it is for you. And I mean, I think that's also an important part of the process of grieving as well, is like looking at, well, what did I get out of being that way from like an egoistic perspective? Like what did my ego get in terms of being right, in terms of like, believing that I'm damaged, that there's something wrong with me, that I can't do it, that I am not powerful, like grieving that, just grieving the loss of that old friend, even though that old friend was a dick,
Yeah. Yeah.
even though I don't like that guy. And he had all these damaging ways of being. He's still my friend. He still got me to where I am. And so I have to
Yeah.
grieve the loss of that person, that I'm not going to be that way. Otherwise, I can't become the new man. I can't, as you were
Yeah.
saying, acknowledge the ashes in the grieving process.
Yeah. I think about my nieces a lot. Part of the reason I moved from Los Angeles to Denver is to be closer to family, especially my nieces. And they're 1, 3, 5, and 7 years old. And I love them so much. It's almost painful sometimes.
Hmm.
And yet, occasionally they do things that I don't like. Like I was over there the other day and one decided to bite my arm. Didn't feel very good. Didn't like that. But like, even though she did something that I didn't like, I love her so much. Like
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. I'm gonna share with her I don't like that, don't do that, like all those things. But I think it's the same way for us. Like there are aspects of ourselves that we might not like. We wouldn't choose in a particular moment. We might even want to leave behind. But that doesn't
Hmm.
mean that your love for that person of who you have been can be or should be diminished. And if anything, it's the opposite. Like that,
Hmm.
those ways of being need more love, need more
Hmm.
openness, need more generosity. Same with my nieces, same for ourselves, right? Like when we can really let go and love and forgive is, to your point, when we're able to integrate that version of ourselves into who we are to become something greater.
Yeah. Wow. That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. And I got something that I haven't gotten before, which is like my grieving of who I've been in the past is my love for myself.
Yeah.
Like that's an inherent aspect of grieving, is acknowledging, especially in this when we're talking about reinventing ourselves,
Yeah.
it's saying I love myself and I love myself despite the way that been being, and I release that part of myself. I mean, it's similar to like, right, I grieve the loss of my dad I grieve him every day. Every
Yeah.
day I grieve my father.
Yeah.
uh and I allow myself that. I'll sing to him, I talk to him, I allow myself to be sad. I'm just like, okay, that's great. And you know what, it means that I love my dad. uh
Yeah.
and and it brings him deeper into my heart, and like all of
Yeah.
the beautiful great things about my dad, um even the things that I didn't like about my dad growing up or whatever, like I still love my dad, and like I get his struggle and and all the things that he had to deal with, and then going back, then that's like ties me into the ancestral lineage of all the
Yeah.
people before me that I love, and I grieve because I love them, because here
Yeah,
I am. So that's part of the puzzle, is like this process of grieving in terms of reinvention is really self-love. It's really loving myself,
I
giving
think
myself
so.
more love.
I mean,
Hmm.
there's that overused saying of what you resist persists, and I think grieving is the missing link in that,
Hmm.
of you're not resisting it anymore. Like there's some reason you're fighting it, like you don't like it for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But when you really allow it in and you accept the grief or the pain or the loss, whatever it is, it allows it to move through you, or like I said, integrate into you in new and profound ways.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. And and I think, we have a societal reticence to be sad. It's bad to be sad,
I
right?
know.
Which it's fascinating. When you look at history, particularly of theater, obviously, that's something I've studied. Tragedies were just as common as comedies in the history, back in the good old days,
Yeah.
in the Greek days, etc. Even in the Shakespearean days, right? There were as many tragedies as there were comedies. Sometimes maybe even more tragedies actually from Shakespeare than there were comedies.
Hmm.
But nowadays, I mean, there are dramas, but most of the things kind of end up with a happy ending, that's the definition of a comedy. There's a
Oh,
reticence by us to be sad, whereas I feel like our forebears really understood the necessity of being sad and how liberating it is. And so
wow.
I think there's a reluctance. That's another reason why we need more grieving, is because it's something that we used to look at and be like, oh, okay, no, grieving, that's a critical part of life. My ancestors, probably your ancestors also, were going to the Wailing Wall,
Yep.
and in Ireland, right, in Scotland. That was a thing. That was part of the deal. Go there and cry for like days on end and really get it out, really allow it to move through us. And then from there, like, we can reinvent ourselves, recreate ourselves and our relationships. So yeah.
Yeah. There's this Norwegian study that's constantly fascinating to me. And they looked at discomfort in general, right? Grief, pain, loss, anything in that category of things. And they found that people that didn't deal with those things, that didn't deal with that pain, didn't deal with the grief, were left not unwilling, but unable to act in accordance with the knowledge that they already had. So that means they know what to do, but unwilling to confront the grief or loss or pain or whatever it is. They were unable to do it, which is just
Yeah.
wild to me. Like I can't say I love grief, but now I see it as a necessity, a necessity to move forward. I have to find it, especially if something worth grieving shows up. For
Yeah.
myself, like I'm ready to let go of this part of me, this way of being, this way of acting, this way of treating people, or in the world around me, maybe losing somebody close to myself. I will look for the
Hmm.
grief because I know I need to experience that to be able to grow from it.
Yeah. That's so beautiful. Yeah. I totally agree. If I start
Yeah.
crying, I'm like, oh, bring it on.
Yeah, like this is it.
I mean, yeah, let's go. Okay, this is so I'm moving some energy here so I can be, bigger Jeff or whatever, and honor who
Yeah.
I've been and honor who the person is, etc. It's that study is so fascinating to me. Really, it occurred to me while you were talking about it. It's like, how often do you encounter somebody, a friend, a loved one, etc., and it's like, you can see so clearly, hey, if you just did this or this, you problem solved. You would get what you want in life,
Yeah.
in your career, etc. How often does that happen? All the time. And I don't know about you,
Hmm.
but historically speaking, there have been incidents where I feel like I gave them the codes on a silver platter. Here are the things that you need to do to totally transform your life and make your business or your endeavor, whatever you're up to, successful.
Yeah.
And then they don't do it. They don't do it at all. In fact, they go the other direction. And it's like, well, we're still friends, but you didn't listen to me. So I feel like you didn't hear me. But then also, oh, there's a pride because I didn't get where you were coming from so that I fully listened to you. So I didn't do my job as your friend to really get where you're coming from so that you could recreate yourself.
Yeah.
And also an acknowledgement that, oh, the underlying thing is that they haven't grieved who they've been. They haven't grieved the problem. They haven't cried about it. And they're unwilling to do that, as you say. And so therefore it's impossible for them to move forward because they won't grieve.
Yeah, I think one of the pitfalls I see oftentimes, not just out there in the world, but in some of the people that I'm closer with, is everybody wants to make each other feel better. And don't get me
Yeah.
wrong, I don't want like people to be sad all the time, not at all. But if I'm expressing something that I'm really beat up about, or I'm grieving something, I don't want to hear from you. Feel better. It's going to be okay.
Hmm.
What I
Right.
want is what all humans want, which is to be seen. I want you to
Yeah.
recognize the pain that I'm going through. I want you to look me in the eyes and say, I'm human too. I feel this too. And, we'll get to a point where, we'll want to feel better and there's steps to take out of that. But, without going into the depths of it, you're unable to shake it. I think about it as like this. Um, if your life is moving along some kind of linear trajectory, you've got to go down. You've got to take a step down into the pain, the loss, the suffering, whatever it is, to be able to process those things to then achieve a higher level of performance. Otherwise, it's just going to hold you back.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
So that's grieving. Step 3. So number 1, forgiveness. Number 2, grieving. Number 3, acceptance.
Yeah.
That I accept the way that I've been, that I accept all the missteps, all the judgments that I've had about myself, about other people, that I really accept who I am and who I've been. And like, it's okay. It's and this, I feel like, these are non-linear steps, right?
Sure.
All throughout the process, it's like still there's like deeper levels of acceptance. Accept, okay, man, wow, I really shit the bed in that relationship, really. Man, whoa, can't believe I did that.
Yeah.
Okay, I accept that I did that, and I honor that that's not who I am anymore.
Yeah.
I accept all the mistakes that I've made. I accept who I've been so that I can accept myself for who I dream myself of being.
Yeah.
And that's the other side of the acceptance train to me, is like, we don't. Oh God. And I please understand, I really say this fully, myself included, 100% myself included. But we're so addicted to acting small and being smaller than who we are, and being convinced that we can't do it. And I mean, for whatever reason, that seems to just be part of how it is that we humans grow, at least in this culture, in this society, in
Yeah.
this global culture, I think. um, there are examples of indigenous communities who don't have that, who really like honor themselves from the get-go, and they're like, oh, no, I am, an extension of the creator, and so therefore I can't really question myself.
Yeah.
There are examples of that in different indigenous traditions around the world, but in our tradition it's not like that. We're just addicted to playing small, and so there's an acceptance of accepting that I can be the man that I dream of being.
Yeah.
There's an acceptance of that I can really see, oh, I could be a rock star. I could really see that my music would totally take off and people would love my music. This is for me personally, right? There's an acceptance of me. Oh, I could really be an amazing actor. I could really create an amazing film that people were really, they loved that. Oh,
Yeah.
there's an acceptance of me that, oh, I could create a podcast where I share, my insights and I hesitate to say wisdom, but wisdom, uh, about life, what I've learned at this stage in life. I'm not 22. You know what I mean? So I've got some track record. I got some years under my belt. All right, I'm running the race.
Yeah.
There's certain things that I look back and I go, oh, this is really valuable. I wish I had known that. Therefore, I'm going to talk about it
Yeah.
in a way that people can easily understand, and also that I can get deeper for myself, so
Hmm.
that I can expand more, and I can talk to people like you, who have other insights about it, so that together we grow, so that together we win.
Yeah. Well, and I do think all of these steps are hard, right? Like reinvention is not an easy thing, period. But
Mm-mm.
specifically around acceptance, I think that's hard to find. Like it's really hard to ultimately accept where you're at and what you've done and all the things. And when we struggle with that, I think we can borrow acceptance from other people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's your acceptance of me and all my low points that helps remind me of, oh yeah, I can accept myself. Back to my story with my nieces. Um, I made sure that when she bit me, she didn't feel like she was a bad person. She
Right.
could feel like how much I care for her. That's just not something that you do. And she's younger than really getting into much cognitive processing, but I think it works for adults as well. When I'm
Yeah.
having a hard time accepting something, I can look to one of the people around me to kind of show me that acceptance, show me that ultimate love for myself when I've forgotten it, and it
Mm.
reminds me to come back to it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's really great. I had not considered that before, but that's a really beautiful piece. I mean, that's something that I can lean on, like, my wife or my friends, because I know that they accept me for who I am. So that's a easy conversation to have. And also, by the way, I think it should be made clear so much of this needs to happen in dialogue.
Yeah.
It can't just happen in my journal. It can't. There has to be some communication either with, like, a therapist or a trusted friend or a men's group or a sister group or whatever,
Yeah.
or grandma or grandpa, or an actual person who can give you feedback, who's going to really like see, oh, okay, I really see that they're really trying to expand here, and I really want to also give them the acceptance that I have for them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, nobody does it alone.
Yeah.
Nobody does it alone. And I know oftentimes, we're in conversations about, well, how do I sustain higher levels of performance? Well,
Hmm.
before that, I want to have a conversation about how you sustain a collective of people around you that are going to really support you, accept you, hold
Yeah.
you accountable in ways that are necessary for your growth. You want the performance, you better have the people.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that that's you know what also part of what you're pointing to, which I think is so brilliant, is that we are so concerned with performance. How do I make more? How do I get more? How do I achieve more? How do I get that job, etc.? And that becomes more important than anything else, which is really a greed thing. Ultimately, like it or not, it's a hungry ghost greed thing, where, like,
Hmm.
right, the hungry ghost in Buddhism is this idea, this energy that, like, we can never be satisfied or satiated. It'll just always want more, 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 more. It doesn't matter that it, like, has way more than it needs to survive, which, I
Yeah.
mean, look at our culture, right? The rich get richer, the poor get poorer,
Yep.
because the rich want more, 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 because they don't have that community of support around them, because they're not emotionally fed, because they're just concerned with getting the thing. And so then, that also leads people to, and leads us societally and economically, and from a corporate standpoint, to just constantly get more no matter what, and not look at the consequences of who's on the other side of us getting more.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and just that pathway of more it's unsustainable.
Yeah.
You might produce some results along the way. I know people that have made 7, 8, and 9 figures all of a sudden have the numbers in the bank account and they're like, well, wait a minute. It doesn't work.
Hmm.
And it takes achieving that level of success for them to realize that they didn't have some of the fundamental building blocks that they needed as a human being. And I don't
Yeah.
think we have to wait until we have the thing to reach a level of acceptance to come to terms with this stuff. I think that's work that we can do now. And somewhat ironically, the more work like that we're able to do now, the more it's going to pay off in the end. So you can
Hmm.
not only get the money or the relationship or whatever it is you're looking for, but you can have that fulfillment component as well. So you're
Yeah.
actually taking it all in.
Right, exactly. So that you can have happiness while you're achieving what you're achieving,
Why not?
and that your happiness is not defined by the fact that you're achieving what you're achieving, so that you can actually live a balanced life.
Yeah.
I mean, I think also like the whole more thing, the greed based operating system. Here we go again. It just ignores, as I was saying, it ignores the cost to other people. So it's like, Old Navy's not. They don't care about the fact that their clothing is produced by sweatshops.
Yeah.
You know, the bottom line is you can get a really nice pair of shorts for $20, and that's all they care about.
Mhm.
And the people that are shopping there, and I'm totally calling you out, Old Navy, because fuck you.
Yeah.
Really, really, just go fuck yourself for putting child labor for doing that. Really, it's just awful. If you shop there, please stop. I don't know, whatever. But like, there's no concern for the human cost
Yeah.
of what they're creating. It's just about the bottom line. And when you're employing 11-year-olds that are basically child slave labor, and then you look the other way so that you can have corporate gain and make stockholders happy. What are you doing? That's just, I mean, that's really part and parcel of the collapse that we're witnessing right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry that got deep for a second, guys. You know what I mean? Just trying to speak the truth here as much as possible, and that's my truth.
I think it's important though, and I think breaking free of the circumstances that we think we need to find happiness is true freedom. Freedom is
Hmm.
not found in a relationship, and it's not found in a bank account. It's found in
Yeah.
your unattachment to those things. And when you're
Hmm.
able to kind of break those bonds, you're able to be more in alignment with who you are and achieve the things that you want to and arguably are meant to achieve.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's beautiful. So that's good. That brings us to step 4, which, by the way, I just want to say, going back to the beginning of the podcast when you're talking about really like standing in the abyss, looking out, what do you want to create, being that courageous. That's step 4, courage, right?
Yeah.
Acknowledging fear and acting anyway, which, I mean, you are an expert on. You wrote a book on it, right? Hunting Discomfort, which, if you haven't read it, by the way, please check it out. It's amazing. Um, Acknowledging fear and acting anyway, being courageous. That's step 4. Having courage. That's step 4. And reinventing yourself. Oh, I have to really, like, this is going to stretch me in ways that I
Mhm.
have never been stretched before. I'm going to have to do stuff that I am uncomfortable doing, and I'm not going to like it. I mean, look, I'm an actor. I've had a lot of formal training with that. I'm a musician. I have to look at myself all the time doing this stuff. I have to go back and edit this podcast. For most people, including myself, that is horrifying.
Mhm.
Oh my God, I have to like listen to myself and watch myself.
Yeah.
I've had to get to a level of acceptance. This is part of the game. You want to make a difference, you got to accept yourself for how you are and adjust. And it's hard. So what I'm saying is, like,
Mm.
I'm highly sympathetic to the idea of courage, and that I have to like move beyond my fear and my uncomfortability. Are they going to like me? Is this going to go right?
Yeah.
Am I going to mess this up? Acknowledging that fear and acting anyway, moving forward anyway, is an absolutely essential component of reinventing oneself.
Yeah.
And that seems like a great place to end part 1 of this 2-part episode on reinvention with Sterling Hawkins. If you'd like to support Lunacy, please go to patreon.com/Lunacy Podcast. Also, please do yourself a favor and me a favor. Go to lunacycommunity.com, get yourself a profile, sign up for that stuff. It's free, trying to build it so we can create something together. As a quick recap, the first 4 steps, as I have outlined them, to reinventing oneself are: number 1, forgiveness, releasing attachments. Number 2, grieving for how you've been and how sad that may be. And also grieving for who you were and how you'll actually miss that part. Number 3, acceptance and self-love. Number 4, courage, acknowledging fear and acting anyway. Tune in next week for the next 3 steps to reinvention and to watch me physically transform before your very eyes. How is that even possible? Only one way to find out. Until then, much love.